Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the good people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
I have a listener question. Joel Stam wrote, I really enjoyed the recent episode about Google getting charged infinity dollars. I have to ask, how in the world do you choose an appropriate discount rate when doing present value calculations? What he's going to say here, I've experienced as well as a student. I sat through hours of this stuff in my undergrad classes, and whenever we were given homework problems to work through, the discount rate was just provided as if it were providentially from on high, miraculously calibrated for just the answer the homework problem was looking for.
Well, that's right, but the discount rate for infinity dollars is always nonsensical.
Well, the infinity dollars is nonsensical. Here's what's going on. The discount rate, for those who aren't up on such things, we covered this several episodes ago when we talked about, what was it, 20 septillion dollars, whatever it was that the Russian court fined Google. Discount rate is the rate at which you regard future dollars as less valuable than current dollars. And part of that is, well, because of inflation, but part of it also is because if the dollars are in the future, that means that you can't spend them now, you have to wait till later.
And we could all be dead by then.
And you could all be dead by then, exactly, right? There's all kinds of reasons why you'd rather have the dollars now than later. And the rate at which the dollars become less valuable to you the further into the future they are, that's what we call the discount rate. You see this thing, or a version of it, I should say, all the time. We call it the interest rate. So suppose you have the opportunity to put $100 in a savings account that pays, let's say, 5% interest. So every year you get 5% on that $100. If your response to that is, oh yes, I'd like to do that, I'll put my $100 in the bank and get $5 a year in exchange, then your discount rate is less than 5%. That is, the fact that you have to wait to get your dollars back is less painful to you because you're getting $5 a year interest paid. On the other hand, if somebody offers this and says, look, put $100 in the bank, we'll pay you $5 a year, and you say, no way, I'd rather have the $100 now, well, then your discount rate is higher than the 5%. Waiting isn't worth it to you. So basically speaking, that's the discount rate. It's a subjective thing, right? Mine might be different than yours. In fact, that's why some people borrow and some people lend. I mean, think about it. If we all had the same discount rate, then we'd all either be looking to borrow or we'd all be looking to lend. The very reason that Ant might be willing to lend you, James, money, and you, James, are willing to pay interest to me is because you'd rather have the money now and I would rather have it later. We have different discount rates.
I've asked you for money repeatedly and you never come through.
Yeah, that's because you missed that key footnote of you got to pay it back. But, so Joel asks this serious question here. So where do you get this discount rate for calculating these present value calculations? And the answer is, you can get it by observing behavior, right? If it's an individual and you say to me, look, put your $100 in the bank, I'll pay you 5%. And I say, nah, I'm not willing. You say, well, I'll pay you 6%. I said, no, maybe, but no, I don't like it. I'll pay you 7. Okay, 7, I'll put it in the bank. Okay, you just identified my discount rate. It's somewhere between 6 and 7%. And you can observe this with companies. Typically, you use what's called the weighted average cost of capital. That is, how much interest does the company have to pay in order to raise money? If it's a big, safe company, it has to pay less interest. If it's a small, risky company, it has to pay more. But one thing that we do when we use discount rates is we say, well, what's your weighted average cost of capital? That's a decent estimate of what your company's discount rate is.
Is that all?
That's all I got. That's the answer.
My eyes are starting to glaze over, so it must be time to move on. You know, you talk about ChatGPT a lot, and the one observation that I've got, well, I mean, there might be others, but the real issue with ChatGPT is that it's kind of a pain to use.
Oh my God, I was using it just today, and it just freaked me out. It's so horrible.
Well, what's your big problem?
My big problem, I'll tell you this.
Boy, you got testy real fast, didn't you?
I was really annoyed. I wanted what's called the Hirschman-Herfeld index. It's a measure of industry concentration, and it measures basically, do you have one big company or do you have a bunch of little ones? And you can get this, the Census Bureau or Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates this for each of the 1,000 some industry classifications they have. So I go to ChatGPT. I say, hey, can you find this data for me? ChatGPT comes back and says, oh, here it is. It's at this link and this link and that link. And I said, no. Go find the data and give it to me. And ChatGPT comes back and says, oh, I found the data. It's at this link and this link and this link. I said, no, you put together a table with the 1,057 industry classifications, and on the next column, show me the number that goes with that industry. So ChatGPT says, okay, well, now I understand. So it builds me a table. It's got 67 entries. I said, hello, ChatGPT, how many entries are in this table? It says 67. I said, how many industry classifications are there? It says, oh, there's 1,057. Wait a moment, let me put together a table. And it puts together a table. It's the same 67, right? So I'm thinking there's something wrong because it's displaying on the screen. So I say, okay. Put it into an Excel file that I can download. So it says, no problem, put it into the Excel file. And I ask it before I download, how many industries are in here? And I said, whoa, 1,057. So I download the thing. It's the same 67 industries. I said, hello, ChatGPT. You told me there's 1,057. There's only 67 in this file. And it says, oh, terribly sorry, my mistake. Here's a fresh file that contains the 1,057, right? I click on it. It says file not found.
That all seems right. And this, for those of you listening out there, this is why college students are failing by the truckload when they rely on ChatGPT to cheat in their classes.
Oh,
but I'm getting at a more basic thing. I mean, it's just a pain to use.
Oh, tell me, what do you think?
Well, I got to go find it. I got to download it. I have to have this stupid app that resides on my various devices. And that's an impediment. It's got to be integrated in order to be accepted and to work well. And Apple has finally integrated ChatGPT with its Siri feature.
Oh, has it really?
Yeah, so when you ask a question of Siri, Siri will determine whether it's a simple question, at which point Siri will answer your question, or a more complex question, which it'll punt over to ChatGPT behind the scenes with you being none the wiser. This is about how things start to get adopted worldwide, right? This is a big step.
Okay, so we're almost to where I want this thing. Is it the case, can you, as you could, I believe you could with Siri, ask it what's on my calendar for today?
I don't know. I don't know how far down it's going to go. I have a Mac. I have an iPad. I haven't gone and chased after this yet. This will be something I'll try next week and see how it works. But it's interesting to me that finally you start to see this wholesale kind of integration.
Yeah.
And this is a big step to making this a workable technology.
See, and that, for me, that's the home run. When I can have the thing say, read my email, and it says back to me, oh, so-and-so is asking for a meeting on such and such a day. And I can say to it, check my calendar. If I'm available, send a reply saying, okay. That's what I want.
I don't expect that we're anywhere close to that anytime soon, but I'll let you know if we are. It'll be about this time next week when I've got something else to say about it, I would guess. But I want to go, Ant, for the foolishness of the week, back to one of my favorite sites, Study Finds. We talk about this from time to time. And today, I learned something about genital herpes that I never knew before.
Well, that came out of left field.
There's a sentence you weren't expecting. How many people worldwide do you think have genital herpes?
I would guess worldwide, I would be surprised if it's under 50%.
It is 846 million people.
846 million? Million
People. Somehow our friends at Study Finds gets that to say about 10%.
Yeah.
No. They said about, what was their big, shocking headline? Their math was wrong. It is about 10%.
Yeah.
How on earth did we end up with 10% of the world's population having herpes.
Oh, I'm really surprised it's that low. Of course, not in the United States. I'm picturing lesser developed countries where I'm assuming it runs rampant.
Here's the math that caught my attention. More than 1 in 5 people between the ages of 15 and 49.
Okay, here we go. Yeah.
Wow, 20% from 18 to 49. Good God. You know, it's not a mystery how we get this. This is easily avoided. It's kind of like when people talk endlessly about pregnancy and abortion, never once bringing up the fact that we have products on the market to get in the way of this process.
Yeah, but again, I'm going to come back to, I bet you it varies widely by country.
Yeah, I don't give a You don't have to get this. There's an easy way around this. I mean, come on. Do I have to say it out loud?
But again, if you're talking about a lesser developed country where not only do you have the problem of lesser health care, lesser access to what you're talking about, but lesser education about these things.
I don't think there's much of anybody in the world who doesn't know this much. I mean, I look forward to being corrected en masse by all of our friends and followers when they all yell at me this week in the hate mail. But sorry, this is beyond stupid. This is the foolishness of the week, maybe the foolishness of the month. But anyway, we've got a main topic which might be equally or more foolish, so let's find out.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. I'm sorry, I'm too busy looking up the numbers. I'm still on the herpes thing.
Let it go, Ant. We're done with the herpes thing now. Let it go.
I've got National Institutes of Health here. Sense. Okay, I'm going to have to let that go.
First time for everything.
I'm sorry. What's our topic for today?
I swear to God, man. I swear to God.
Yeah. Oh, this is where I say something.
Yes.
Yes. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act. This was one of the larger things that we got from the Trump administration first time around. And if you recall, there was people on one side of the equation said, oh, this is good, it's going to be tax cuts. And people on the other side of the equation said, no, this is just a giveaway because it's tax cuts for the rich. But nonetheless, the thing passed. And when it passed, it had built into it an automatic sunset. So if
let's hold the phone for just a second. Remember how terrible it was? I mean, people were saying that it would be the end of the universe. And look, the budget deficit skyrocketed under Trump. It absolutely skyrocketed. He showed no fiscal responsibility whatsoever. But the Biden administration came in and they could have easily shut this down. They didn't even try.
Yeah, and I'll get into the numbers in a minute, but while the deficit did balloon under Trump, it did not balloon because our revenues fell.
It ballooned because spending, as it always does.
Right. So whatever else is going on, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act was not responsible there.
Well, I mean, look, I'm never going to say a tax cut is responsible for our financial straits. But if you owe tons of money, maybe you should think about cutting spending and leaving revenue alone.
Right.
But we didn't, and the Biden administration came right in and let the whole thing just sail right through, and now it's up to conclude in 2025.
That's right. It's supposed to sunset in 2025. So if Congress does nothing, the tax code reverts to where it was in 2017. If Congress takes action to extend it, then we keep it.
Which will mean, among other things, that 62% of people who file will see a pretty significant tax increase.
Well, that's the first interesting thing. If you look at the tax brackets, then you will see that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act did indeed look like a gift to the wealthy. That it's the high-level tax brackets that get cut, and the low-level tax brackets remain the same. This is where you got this claim that Tax Cut and Jobs Act is tax cuts for the rich. But people who say this are missing an important thing. which is in addition to the changes in the tax brackets, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act doubled the standard deduction.
Which is quite impressive if you are on the lower end of the income scale.
Oh, it's quite impressive if you're in the middle of the income scale.
Yeah, that's right. And let's be sure to point out the same thing that you and I point out every single time we talk about the federal income tax. When you take into account everything, transfers and payments, 60% of the American people do not pay income tax.
Right. They actually receive back more transfers than they pay in.
They get more out of the system than they pay in. So what we're really looking at is a situation in which only the pretty well off pay income tax at all.
Yeah.
When you say things like, well, the rich should pay their fair share, well, they're already paying all of it. How much more than all do you want?
Right.
And that's, I think, a reasonable question to ask that will never get answered. Kind of like, what percentage is their fair share? No politician will ever stand up and say 87%, of course.
Yeah.
Even Bernie Sanders won't say that. Right?
I have to put a big footnote here. First off, we're talking about federal taxes, not state and local. Second, this is income tax only, not payroll tax. So Social Security, Medicare taxes aren't counted here. And I think it's reasonable not to count them here because really those are purchases of things. You're purchasing, in effect, a pension through Social Security. You're purchasing old age health insurance through Medicare. So you're getting something back for that kind of one for your dollars.
For now.
Yeah, for now. But again, when people talk about the rich paying their fair share, they're typically talking specifically about the income tax. And that's what we're talking about here, not payroll, just income tax.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. They are always talking about the income tax and the corporate income tax.
Oh, and that's a separate issue, the corporate income tax, yeah. But this is the personal income tax we're talking about.
We're on record as saying that the corporate income tax should be zero in every event.
It should be zero, and I don't want to take up this episode with that, but to fend off the hate mail, my problem with the corporate income tax has nothing to do with whether corporations are or are not paying. It has to do with the fact that the corporate income tax is a handy way for politicians to hide the fact that they're taxing people.
That's right. It's a very clear way to muddy the waters, to make it impossible to know how much you're actually paying in taxes, because how much of your purchase ends up paying a tax?
Right, yeah.
There's no way to know.
And if you want an example of this, if you've gone to Europe or talked to someone who's gone to Europe, and often they come back and say, oh, it's great, you just pay whatever the price tag says. Nobody adds tax to the thing. Oh, no, the tax is in the price tag. The difference is, in the United States, you know exactly what the sales tax is because it's calculated separately and you see it. In Europe, you don't know what the sales tax is because it's built into the price. That's what happens with corporate taxes in this country. They get built into the price of the company's product, and you have no idea how much you're paying.
And you don't, and there's no way you ever could, and politicians love this.
Yeah.
What they don't love is telling you what they think the income tax rate should actually be.
Yeah, that's a big thing. You know, they don't want to answer the question, what is fair? And so you never get beyond, well, these people should pay more or these people should pay less or whatever it is.
And let me just state the obvious. We often ask a question that other people of our particular persuasion don't ask. What do we owe each other as a cost to living in civil society? And I don't know what the right answer is, but the right answer is something near no more than 20%. So situate that for me, can you? What percentage of us pay more than that or less than that? I mean, how does that sound, 20%?
Well, the 20% tends to be the number I point to as well, simply because I've got nothing else to point to. And it's the number that keeps falling out of the data. When you ask, what fraction of the economy does the federal government collect from all of its taxes, income, payroll, corporate, capital gains, whatever, from all of its taxes, what slice of the economy does the federal government collect? The answer is consistently 18%. plus or minus 2%. And it doesn't matter whether you tax the rich or the poor or corporations or capital gains or income or payroll, it's always 18%. And so it seems to be the case that we're destined, for whatever reason, for that to be the government's slice of the pie. Well, then the right answer is that appears to be what we owe each other, 20%.
And curiously, if you ask people out of the clear blue what level of taxation they're perfectly comfortable with, they almost always give an answer between 15 and 20%.
Yeah, people's at a gut level, they tend to come back at that point.
Almost always. So interestingly, our gut level intuition matches what, more or less, what the government collects every year anyway. And yet we still have this fair share nonsense that we talk about all the time. Why don't people realize that 20% of a lot is a lot more than 20% of a little?
Well, and then here you get an interesting situation. If indeed 20% or 18%, that's the answer, that's what the government gets, then it causes us, or it should cause us, to think about tax policy questions differently, as with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. Rather than asking the question, will this enable the government to collect more money or less money, or is it taxing the rich or is it taxing the poor, whatever it is? Instead, we should be asking the question, does it grow the economic pie or shrink the economic pie? Because the government is destined to get 18% of the pie. So formulate your tax policy to make the pie as big as possible.
Right, and the tax spending should never outpace the pie.
Oh, now that's an entirely different matter. I agree with you 100%, but that's an entirely different matter now.
It is, but you have to come to terms with how we live, right? That's important because we want lots of stuff for free, and that's always going to yield a gigantic deficit, right? Because we're going to get what we want until it all collapses and we get nothing.
And we do this, all of us. You go to the store and you see something that you want and you ask, can I afford it? Alternatively, what am I willing to give up to get this thing? Those questions we tend not to ask at a national level, but we have to. We should be, because the government gets 18% of the pie. That's all the money that there is. And if you want more stuff than that, the government's going to have to borrow.
Yeah, I want all kinds of stuff, Ant. Chief among that stuff, I want a PlayStation 5. I've talked about this for a year now. I still don't have one. Why not? I can't justify the expense.
Right, yeah.
Right, and that kind of thinking rules each of our lives individually. And we can point to people who seem to be missing that ability. But the vast majority of us live exactly that way. We assess what we've got coming in, responsibilities we've got going out, and what's left over. And that's how rational people live. And sadly, that means I get to live without a PlayStation. Well, so be it. What's next? Okay, I've got heat. I've got electricity.
Right, yeah.
I've got running water. Right? I've paid the mortgage, all kinds of things. And yet, nationally, we refuse to take this approach. And there's a weird thing that happens when these tax cuts are set to expire. We're going to have a debate, and one side of that debate is going to do great damage to the language. And they're going to say, these tax cuts cost us X. No, they don't. Tax cut never cost you a thing. Taxes cost individuals money. That's the appropriate way to look at this. And yet politicians will not do that.
Yeah, that language bothers me as well. For the politician to say the tax cut costs the government, the implication is that the money belongs to the government and it's going to allow us to keep some of it.
That's exactly what it means. And people just accept that without really thinking it through.
Yeah. Let me get back to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, because there's some interesting things going on here. So when this was instituted in 2018, of course, it reduced tax rates mostly at the higher income levels, but importantly for low and middle income people, it doubled the deduction, the standard deduction. And this did a couple things. One is it took a bunch of money off the table. I think the standard deduction before was like $12,000 and change, and with the tax cut, it became like $25,000. So right off the bat, you can take $25,000 off the table, and the government's not going to tax that. That's your standard deduction. That was one big deal. The other big deal is related to that, and that is a huge number of Americans didn't need to itemize their taxes anymore because the standard deduction was so large that you just take the standard deduction. So all of that time and dealing with the accountant or the tax guy and keeping your receipts and all of that went away. You just take the standard deduction and move on. Oh, and by the way, what that meant was that particularly if you're lower middle class, your effective tax rate, so how much of your income you're paying to the federal government after all the dust settles, basically cut in half. If you were paying 10% after all the dust settles, you're now paying 5%. If you were paying 12%, you're now paying 6%. So to the detractors' credit, they are right. It is tax cuts for the rich, but it was also tax cuts for the middle class and poor.
Well, not really for the poor so much because they weren't paying taxes anyway.
Well, that's not the case. The lowest tax bracket kicked in immediately at 10%.
Yeah, but 60% of the American people don't pay anything.
Oh, yeah, after accounting for transfers. Right, you're correct.
I don't think we should talk about taxes without accounting for transfers too. I just think it does nobody any good to casually omit that 60% of the American people are net takers.
Yeah, and so let's remind listeners what transfers are. Transfers are the opposite of taxes. Rather than the government taking money from you, it's giving you money. Now, some of this, and it's a small portion, but some of this does fall under the heading of welfare, where the government will cut you a check for whatever, for low-income people, this sort of thing. But a large chunk of it is the earned income tax credit.
Well, I mean, how is that not welfare?
Well, we've decided that we want to help families with children. This is how we go about doing it. Now, I don't have any problem with this as such.
Sounds like welfare.
Well, normally when you think of welfare, you think of help specifically for the poor. This isn't help for the poor. It's help for the middle class.
No, it's middle class, lower middle class, working class. It's targeted to that group of people.
My problem with the earned income tax credit is less that it exists than rather how it's done. And the way it's done is you fill out your tax form at the end of the year and you're doing all the math, and somewhere embedded in there is credit for the earned income tax credit business, and you finish all of your taxes and it says at the bottom, oh, you get a $500 refund. And you would think, as any rational person would, oh, I've paid too much to the government this year, I get $500 back. When in fact, you may have actually paid less than the $500. You pay $200 and you get $500 back. So in other words, they're hiding the earned income tax credit in all the calculations you go through, so you're unaware that the government's actually giving you money that you did not give it to begin with.
Yeah, no, there's a group of people, and it's not a small group, but there's a group of people who literally turns a profit when they fill out their taxes.
Oh, yes, right, yeah.
This is not a matter of getting money back that you overpaid over the year. It's a matter of getting more back than you'll ever pay in a year.
Yeah, and, I'm not prepared to say we shouldn't do that. What I am prepared to say is we should, A, be above board about what we're doing, so it's not hidden, and B, then ask a serious question, is it fair? Now, maybe the answer is yes. I've got no problem with the answer being yes. But I want to ask the question, after everything is crystal clear what we're doing, do the American people think this is fair?
Yeah, I want to ask that question too. My knee-jerk reaction, my gut reaction is that no, this is never going to pass muster. And the only thing that ever will is if we all know exactly what the tax rate is. There's only one of them and we all pay it. And I'm okay with carving out a deduction, right? So that we all pay 20% over 50,000 or whatever. But I think there really should only be two questions that politicians are allowed to answer. What's the tax rate? What's the standard deduction?
Yeah, if that's all they could do, there'd be a lot less mischief.
There'd be no mischief.
Part of the reason our tax code is multi-hundreds of thousands of pages long is because the politicians and special interests both like it that way. They can hide what they're doing in the tax code in such a way the rest of us can't see it. But let me go back, because I'm not done with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. So this was instituted in 2018. It's supposed to sunset in 2025. In going to the question that you raised earlier, what is this costing the federal government? It turns out it's not costing it much of anything. In the 5 years prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the government collected from personal income tax only an amount equal to about 11% of the GDP. So 11% of the economy, that's what the government collected in personal income tax prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. In the 5 years since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, oh, and by the way, I'm going to cut out 2020 here because of all the COVID nonsense. But apart from COVID, in the 5 years since the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, what fraction of GDP has the government collected in personal income tax? The answer is the exact same 11%.
It's funny how these sorts of calculations keep happening.
Yeah.
Why is it 18% every year, regardless of how they jigger up the rules? Why is it 11% those 5 years versus these 5 years when the rules were radically different?
Yeah, why is it? I do not know, but it is. Let me point out one other thing that's going on here. You said in the last episode, and you're absolutely right, it's a fundamental truth of economics that you will get less of anything you tax. And here, when you tax income, you're going to generate less income. Specifically, you're going to give people a disincentive to work. And I'm going to tread cautiously here because there are lots of other things going on at the same time, but the story I'm going to tell you matches. In the 5 years prior to the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, when tax rates were higher, people were paying a greater portion of their income, the unemployment rate averaged 6% in the 5 years prior. In the 5 years after the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, the unemployment rate averaged 4%, again, ignoring the COVID year.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily that one is causing the other, but that is the consistent story. It's a story we would expect that if you cut the taxes according to what we understand, the government should get the same slice, but you take away the disincentive to work, your unemployment rate goes down. So the pie actually should be getting larger.
And 4% unemployment is way better than 6%.
Way better, yeah.
I mean, people think these are small numbers. No, these are gigantic numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the human answer here? How many more people are working at 4% than at 6%?
Oh, and I can tell you that because our workforce is roughly 160 million people. I believe that's correct. And a 2 percentage point change, you're talking 3 million jobs.
3 million human beings are doing better than they were otherwise.
Yeah.
And as a result, we're all doing better than we would have done otherwise, right? Because this rising tide lifts all boats.
Let me close out my comments on the Tax Cut and Jobs Act by saying I'm not advocating one way or the other. If we leave the thing alone, it sunsets. If Congress takes action, it doesn't. And I'm not advocating one way or the other, but I am saying that the problem is more complex than the media will make it out to be. This is not simply a matter of, oh, let it expire because we have deficits, the government needs to collect more money. It's much, much more complicated than that.
And my prediction here is that this gets renewed without a whole lot of difficulty.
I think so. You would think that way because of political forces. This was a big piece of Trump's first administration. It would be weird if in his second, he allows it to sunset.
He's got slim majorities in Congress that are going to work to make this happen. So I don't see a way around that. I'm happy to watch it happen and get the answer in real time. But I think this one is pretty clear. I don't see a way that this goes away. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.